The protectors fled, but one human stood his ground before the Queen. The small human colony below looked tiny from the ridge where Luke Harmon stood. The wind whipped his hair and tugged at his coat, but he did not move. Around him, the ground was cracked and uneven, a reminder that this world was harsh, a death world by many standards. Most humans had avoided it for that reason. But here they were, settling, planting their homes, and trying to live among dangers that only a few species had survived. Today, however, the danger was not the planet itself. The danger came from the sky. Ships appeared first as tiny dots, but they grew quickly. Huge shapes filled the horizon, black and silver with strange lights that blinked like eyes. Luke felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his face calm. The Protectors, a group of alien warriors who had promised to protect humanity, had already retreated. He knew it was a hopeless battle if they stayed. Still, Luke did not run. The people in the colony were panicking. Families ran from their homes, carrying children and whatever supplies they could grab. The air filled with the sounds of alarms, and the ground shook as distant blasts hit near the colony. Luke's heart raced, but he did not panic. He could hear the faint hum of the Queen's ships as they moved closer, a sound like a low growl, full of promise and threat. Luke had never been a soldier. He was a former engineer, a man who had spent most of his life building and repairing machines. But he had a sharp mind and quick reflexes. He had learned to observe and act. Now all those skills mattered. He crouched on the ridge, looking through a small scope he had built. He studied the ships, noting their patterns, the speed of their descent, the angles of their weapons. Each ship was huge, far bigger than any human vessel he had ever seen. Their weapons could level the colony in seconds. Still, he did not look away. He had seen humans scatter before danger. He had been there when others had fled in fear. But this time was different. This time, he would not run. The first wave of scouts dropped from the larger ships, descending like dark birds. They landed near the colony's edge, their legs spreading wide as they touched the ground. They were tall, with arms that looked like blades and eyes that glowed like fire. The humans nearby screamed and ran, but Luke stayed where he was. He had no weapon strong enough to destroy them all, but he had his mind, and that could be more dangerous than any gun. He picked up a small communicator and spoke quietly, trying to reach the remaining Protectors, though he knew many had already fled. "This is Luke Harmon. If anyone is still holding ground, I need support, but even if you cannot, I will not let them reach the colony." Static came back, then a faint voice. "Luke, we're retreating. You're on your own, be careful." Luke swallowed hard, but his jaw set firm. Alone, he would not be easy to defeat. He had spent weeks preparing for emergencies, studying alien technology, learning how to use it. Even now, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small energy disruptor, a device he had cobbled together from scraps and ideas. It was not much, but it could confuse the sensors of the Queen's forces, making it harder for them to target him. He took a deep breath. Around him, the colony burned. Smoke rose from homes hit by the alien scouts. The people ran, crying and shouting, but he ignored the noise. He focused on the task at hand. First, he needed to survive long enough to give the colony a chance. Then perhaps he could turn this desperate moment into something more. The scouts began to move closer. They did not seem to fear him. To them, he was just one human among thousands. But Luke had learned one important thing. The Queen and her kind underestimated humans, and that had always been their weakness. He clenched his fists. If they thought one man could be ignored, they were about to learn how wrong they were. He activated the energy disruptor. A small wave of shimmering light spread around him. The scouts froze for a moment, their sensors confused. He had learned that even a simple change in energy signatures could cause hesitation in alien machines. It was not much, but it was enough to slow them. The wind picked up, and the clouds above twisted violently. The Queen's ship loomed now, massive and terrifying, casting a shadow over the ridge. Luke could feel the heat of its engines even from this distance. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Ships he had studied in textbooks and simulations could not compare to this. It was more than a ship, it was a fortress in the sky. Luke's mind raced. How could he stop this? He had no army, no heavy weapons, no real chance to fight directly, but he did have his mind. He did have his courage. And he had something the Queen could not understand: determination. He would not run. He would not surrender. He remembered stories he had heard as a child, stories of humans facing impossible odds and surviving. He remembered his father telling him, "Courage is not the absence of fear, Luke. Courage is facing it no matter what." Luke felt that courage now, burning inside him, a small but fierce flame. The scouts advanced again, stepping over debris and burned-out homes. Luke adjusted his disruptor, focusing on their sensors. They paused, confused. One tilted its head, a gesture almost like thinking. Luke realized that even these creatures, bred for war and destruction, could be delayed by intelligence. A small smile appeared on his face. This was the first small victory. He turned to look at the colony below. Families were still running, but some had stopped, peering at him from behind shelters. Children clutched their parents, eyes wide with fear. He wanted to shout, to tell them everything would be okay, but he knew words alone would not save them. Action would. He noticed a group of scouts moving toward the colony's main power station. If they reached it, they could disable the entire settlement's defenses. Luke's mind worked quickly. He had a plan, though it was risky. He could not fight all of them directly. He would have to draw them toward him, make himself the target. Then, perhaps, he could buy enough time for the colonists to escape. He checked his disruptor again, adjusted the settings, and activated it fully. A bright pulse of light shimmered outward. The scouts stopped, their heads turning toward him. Luke began to run down the ridge, careful to keep his movement steady, not panicked. The scouts followed, moving faster now. Every step he took was calculated. He led them toward a narrow canyon where their large frames would be slowed. The disruptor would confuse them further, giving him small bursts of advantage. As he ran, he ducked under low rock formations, leaped over gaps, and used the uneven terrain to his benefit. The scouts struggled in the canyon. Their long legs were not made for narrow paths, and the disruptor interfered with their sensors. Luke kept moving, keeping his focus. His heart pounded, but he did not let it distract him. Finally, he reached a vantage point overlooking the canyon's exit. The scouts were behind him, frustrated and confused. Luke could see the colony still burning in the distance. He knew he had bought time, but it was not enough. The Queen would arrive soon. He needed a new plan. Luke took a deep breath and looked up. The massive Queen's ship was closer now, filling more of the sky. Its engines roared like thunder, shaking the ground beneath him. He had never felt fear like this, yet he stood firm. He would face the impossible because that was what humans did. They faced danger, no matter the odds. The first part of the battle was over, but the war had only just begun. Luke Harmon had made his choice. While the protectors had fled, he would not. He would stand, not just for himself, but for every human in the colony. And as the shadow of the Queen's ship grew larger, Luke knew one thing clearly. This was the moment that would decide everything. The Queen's ships hung over Varney's 7 like a storm about to break. From the ridge, Luke Harmon could feel their weight, even at a distance. The ground trembled under the hum of their engines, and the air was thick with heat and energy. Every person in the colony was running, hiding, or trying to gather what little supplies they could save. Luke did not move from his position. His eyes were fixed on the scouts below, on the machines of war that moved with unnatural grace. He adjusted the small energy disruptor in his hands. It was a simple device, but it had already confused several scouts. He knew he could not destroy the entire alien force, but he could slow them down, mislead them, and make them hesitate. That hesitation could save lives. Luke was not a soldier. He had never been trained in battle. But he had something more important than training: instinct. An instinct told him what to do next. He crouched low and began scanning the terrain. There was a narrow canyon not far from where he stood. Its walls were jagged and high. A few of the scouts were already following him toward it, and he smiled faintly. He would use the canyon to his advantage. The scouts were tall and fast, but they were not built for confined spaces. He could slow them down and confuse them further. Luke activated the disruptor fully. A pulse of energy spread outward, shimmering like heat waves in the air. The nearest scouts stopped and tilted their heads, scanning for the source of the pulse. He sprinted down the ridge, careful not to slip on the loose rocks. The scouts hesitated for a moment before following, their glowing eyes fixed on him. As he ran, Luke thought about the colony below. Families were scattered across the fields. He had seen children clutching each other in terror. He had seen parents frozen in place, unsure whether to run or fight. He could not help everyone, but he could do something. He could buy time. He could make the Queen's forces hesitate. That hesitation might be all the humans needed to survive. The canyon was narrow, as he had planned. The scouts struggled to fit their long bodies through the rocky walls. Luke paused briefly, catching his breath, then activated the disruptor again. The energy pulse caused the scouts' sensors to misfire. They stumbled slightly, confused, their movements jerky. Luke took the opportunity to leap over a small gap in the canyon floor, landing lightly on the other side. From this position, he could see the colony more clearly. Smoke rose from damaged buildings. Fires burned where the scouts had attacked first. Luke's heart ached, but he did not falter. He knew that fear could not guide him now. Only action could. He spotted a group of scouts moving toward the colony's communication tower. If they destroyed it, the colony would lose contact with other human settlements and any potential help. Luke gritted his teeth. He had to stop them. He grabbed a small rock and activated the disruptor again. This time he focused the pulse toward the scouts moving near the tower. The energy shimmered through the air and the scouts froze, unsure of what they were sensing. Luke ran faster now, moving toward the tower. The scouts began to move again slowly, their sensors still confused. He reached the edge of the canyon and saw that the rest of the colony was beginning to take notice. People were peeking from behind shelters, watching him move. Luke felt a small surge of hope. They were not completely helpless. They could see someone fighting back. He reached the tower and quickly climbed its base. From this height, he had a better view of the approaching ships and scouts. He could see the massive Queen's ship hovering above, its engines glowing with a bright, almost blinding light. It was enormous, far larger than any ship he had seen in simulations or textbooks. Its presence alone was enough to make a man feel small and powerless. Luke steadied himself. He could feel the heat from the Queen's ship even at this distance. He knew that if he acted recklessly, he could be destroyed instantly. But he also knew that hesitation would mean death for the colony. He had to act, and he had to act now. He activated the disruptor one final time from the tower. A strong pulse of energy spread outward, hitting the scouts and several smaller ships. The scouts faltered completely, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Some stumbled and fell, unable to recover quickly. The humans below began to cheer quietly, seeing the alien forces hesitate for the first time. Luke felt a small smile form. It was not victory, but it was a start. The Queen's ship reacted immediately. A beam of light shot down toward the tower. Luke ducked behind the structure, feeling the heat wash over him. The beam struck the ground where he had been standing seconds before, sending rocks and dust flying. He had been lucky, too lucky. He knew he could not rely on luck forever. He glanced down at the colony. People were moving now, running towards safer areas, carrying children and supplies. Some were even helping the injured. Luke felt a surge of pride. Even in the face of impossible danger, humans could find courage. He had seen it before in stories, but now he saw it with his own eyes. The scouts recovered from the disruptor's pulse and began to move again. Luke activated the device one last time, focusing all its power on the nearest group. The air shimmered, and the scouts stumbled. But it was not enough to stop them completely. He knew he had to draw them further away from the colony. He jumped from the tower, landing lightly on a slope leading toward a narrow valley. The scouts followed, their movements slowed by the terrain and the disruptor. Luke led them through twisting paths, using every trick he had learned from studying the alien machines. He ducked under low rocks, jumped over gaps, and ran along steep edges, keeping the scouts off balance. The Queen's ship loomed closer, her voice booming through the valley. "Human," she said, her tone cold and commanding. "Why do you resist? Your species is weak. You cannot survive against me." Luke stopped for a moment, breathing hard. He looked up at the massive ship above and answered calmly, "Humans survive because we never give up. You may have power, but we have courage. That is something you cannot destroy." The Queen's voice was like thunder. "Courage is meaningless against my will. You are insignificant." Luke smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Maybe to you, but to us it means everything." He moved again, leading the scouts toward a narrow pass where their large frames would be forced to slow down. The disruptor continued to pulse, confusing their sensors and making them hesitate. Luke could feel the pressure building. The Queen was sending more ships, more scouts, and he was running out of options. But then he saw something that gave him hope. A small group of protectors, the alien warriors who had fled earlier, had returned. They did not look happy or confident, but they had come back to help. Luke nodded to them quickly, signaling that he had a plan. The protectors joined the fight, attacking the scouts from behind. The confusion grew. The scouts stumbled, some falling into the rocky terrain. Luke saw an opportunity. He led the remaining scouts toward a cliff edge, using the disruptor to push them further. The scouts hesitated, unsure of their footing. Luke knew this was his chance. He activated the disruptor fully, sending a strong pulse through the area. The scouts faltered completely, some losing balance and tumbling down the cliff. Others hesitated, unsure whether to follow. Luke used this moment to signal the colony below to move towards safer areas. Families began to move quickly, carrying children and supplies. People who had been frozen in fear now ran with purpose, guided by Luke's courage. The protectors helped them, pushing back the remaining scouts. Luke stayed behind, holding the line as long as he could. The Queen's ship hovered above, observing. Luke could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on him, but he did not falter. He had done what he could to protect the colony. For now, that was enough. As the sun began to set over Varney's 7, the smoke from the fires mixed with the green and purple clouds in the sky. The colony was not safe yet, but they had survived the first wave. Luke looked around, seeing the faces of the people he had helped. Some were exhausted, some were terrified, but all of them had hope. Luke Harmon had stood against impossible odds. He had faced the Queen's scouts alone and had managed to buy time for the colony. He knew this was only the beginning. The Queen would return, stronger and angrier. But for now, he had shown that even one human could make a difference. He looked up at the sky, at the massive ship hovering above. His heart was pounding, but he felt ready. The fight was not over, but Luke Harmon had found his courage. He would not run. He would stand. And he would fight, no matter what came next. The air above Varney's 7 was filled with tension. The Queen's massive ship hung over the colony like a shadow, and her scouts had been slowed but not destroyed. Luke Harmon stood on a rocky ridge, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had managed to buy time for the humans below, but he knew the real test was about to begin. The Queen herself would soon confront him directly, and he had to be ready. Luke's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He had faced impossible odds before, and now he would face something far greater. He adjusted the energy disruptor strapped to his back. It was a small device, but it had already saved lives by confusing the Queen's scouts. Now it would have to do more. He could not fight her ship directly, but he could use his mind and his ingenuity. That had always been the strength of humans. The wind picked up, carrying the faint hum of the Queen's ship closer. Its massive shadow covered the ridge, and the air vibrated with the energy of its engines. Luke could feel it pressing down on him, a force that could crush any ordinary being. But he was not ordinary. He had survived worse, and he had learned how to turn disadvantages into advantage. The first of her elite scouts appeared again, moving quickly toward the colony. They were faster and smarter than the previous group. Luke activated the disruptor, sending a pulse of energy that shimmered in the air. The scouts faltered, their movements jerky and confused, but they recovered quickly this time. He would need a new plan. Luke looked around. The ridge had natural formations he could use. Jagged rocks, narrow paths, and steep cliffs could all slow the alien forces. He began to move, carefully placing himself between the scouts and the colony. He did not run. He moved with purpose, leading them toward a narrow canyon where their size would work against them. As he ran, he thought about the humans below. Families were hiding, peeking from behind burned-out buildings and scattered supplies. Children clutched their parents, and parents looked at him with hope. Luke felt a surge of determination. He would not let them down. Humans had survived countless challenges, and he would be their shield today. The scouts hesitated at the canyon entrance. Luke activated the disruptor fully, sending a strong pulse that spread through the rocky walls. Their sensors misfired and they stumbled, unsure of their surroundings. Luke moved quickly, weaving between rocks and leaping over gaps. The scouts followed, struggling in the confined space. Above the canyon, the Queen's ship hovered, massive and imposing. Its engines glowed with a bright, almost blinding light. Luke felt the heat from the engines wash over him. He knew she could destroy him with a single strike, but he refused to show fear. Humans were not just creatures of flesh and bone. They were thinkers, problem-solvers, and survivors, and Luke intended to prove that. A sudden shadow passed over him. He looked up and saw one of the Queen's elite strike ships descending, faster and larger than the others. Its weapons glowed red, ready to fire. Luke did not hesitate. He activated the disruptor again, focusing the pulse directly on the ship's targeting sensors. The ship faltered, its aim off by several meters. It fired, but the energy beam missed, striking the canyon wall instead. Rocks exploded, sending dust and debris into the air. Luke ducked behind a rock, feeling the heat and force of the blast. He had been lucky, but he knew luck alone would not save him. He needed a plan that relied on skill, not chance. He scanned the ship carefully, noting weak points, angles, and energy flows. His mind worked quickly, calculating distances, timing, and patterns. This was not just survival, it was strategy. The Queen's voice boomed through the air. "Human, your defiance is meaningless. You cannot survive. Why do you continue to resist?" Luke took a deep breath. "Because humans fight no matter what. You cannot understand that. You may have power, but you cannot take our courage." The Queen's ship paused slightly, as if considering his words. Luke realized that even she, powerful and experienced, had never encountered a human like him. Most species scattered at her arrival, but he had stood firm. That was something she did not expect. Luke moved again, leading the scouts deeper into the canyon. The narrow space slowed them down, making their movements clumsy. He used the disruptor to confuse them further, pulsing energy waves that interfered with their sensors. Some stumbled, others collided with the rocky walls. Luke's mind raced, planning the next move. He remembered the emergency power cores hidden in the canyon walls. Weeks ago, while exploring Varney's 7, he had discovered these old mining structures. They contained energy cells capable of creating small explosions if triggered carefully. He had marked their locations and now saw an opportunity. Luke ran toward the first core, pulling wires from his pack. His hands moved quickly, connecting the disruptor to the core. A small pulse of energy flowed through it, causing a controlled explosion that sent a shockwave through the canyon. Several scouts were thrown off balance, and the noise echoed, disorienting the others. Luke smiled faintly. Strategy was working. The remaining scouts hesitated, scanning for threats. Luke moved swiftly, triggering another core. The canyon shook and rocks fell from the walls, blocking some of the scouts' paths. He had used the environment to his advantage, turning the natural terrain and old human technology into weapons. Above, the Queen's ship shifted, and more energy beams shot toward the canyon. Luke ducked and rolled, avoiding the strikes. He activated the disruptor again, sending a strong pulse that interfered with the targeting sensors of the ship. One beam went off course, striking the canyon wall near the scouts. Several were injured but not destroyed. Luke knew he had to act quickly. He sprinted toward a narrow ledge above the canyon floor. From here, he had a better view of the remaining scouts. He saw their patterns, their weak points, and the timing of their attacks. He could manipulate them, lead them into traps, and slow them down further. Humans were clever, and he intended to show it. Luke took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of the Queen's gaze above him. She was powerful, but she had never faced someone who thought so differently. Most species feared her power and fled. He did not. That defiance was his strength. He activated the disruptor fully, sending a powerful pulse through the canyon. The remaining scouts faltered completely, some stumbling into rocks, others colliding with each other. Luke moved quickly, triggering another power core. The explosion rocked the canyon, sending debris flying and blocking the path. The humans in the colony below watched in awe. They had never seen someone face the Queen's forces so directly. Even though the battle was far from over, hope had returned. Luke Harmon had shown them that courage could make a difference, even against impossible odds. The Queen's ship descended lower, energy beams striking near Luke. He moved carefully, avoiding the blasts while continuing to manipulate the environment. The canyon was now filled with obstacles, making it nearly impossible for the scouts to move freely. Luke had turned the terrain into a weapon. Finally, he reached a point where the canyon narrowed to a single path. The scouts were forced to funnel through it, their size and numbers working against them. Luke activated the disruptor one last time, sending a strong pulse that scrambled their sensors completely. They stumbled, collided, and were pushed back by the terrain. Luke stood on the ridge, breathing hard. He had done it. He had slowed the Queen's forces, protected the colony, and shown that one human could stand against overwhelming odds. But he knew this was only the beginning. The Queen would not forget him. She would return stronger, more determined. He looked down at the colony. Families were moving to safer areas, guided by the protectors. Children clung to parents, and parents looked at him with gratitude and hope. Luke smiled faintly. This was why he had stood his ground. This was why humans never gave up. Above, the Queen's ship hovered, massive and imposing. Her voice boomed again, cold and commanding. "You have delayed the inevitable, human, but you cannot win. Surrender now and your people will live. Resist and they will die." Luke clenched his fists, his mind clear. "We will never surrender. You may have power, but humans have courage. That is something you cannot take. We fight no matter what." The Queen's ship paused, as if considering his words. Luke realized that even she, powerful and experienced, had never faced a human like him. Most species scattered at her arrival, but he had stood firm. That was something she did not expect. Luke Harmon had done the impossible. He had slowed the Queen's forces, protected the humans, and shown that one human could make a difference. The battle was far from over, but hope had returned. And in that hope, the humans of Varney 7 found the courage to stand with him. The air above Varney 7 was thick with smoke and heat. The Queen's massive ship hung like a dark cloud over the colony, its engines glowing, radiating power that made the ground tremble. Luke Harmon stood on the ridge, watching the remaining scouts retreat and regroup. He had slowed them, confused them, and forced them into traps. But he knew the Queen would not wait much longer. She had seen his defiance, and now she was curious and dangerous. Luke's mind raced. He had learned much from studying alien technology in the past. Even without the protectors, he had devised ways to use small devices and terrain to confuse and slow the Queen's forces. But this was different. The Queen herself was approaching. She was not a scout or a ship. She was a living presence, intelligent, commanding, and far beyond any force he had faced before. He adjusted the energy disruptor strapped to his back. It had worked well against the scouts, but it was limited against something like her. He needed more than tricks. He needed strategy, intelligence, and courage. And most importantly, he needed to understand her. From above, the Queen's voice echoed through the air. It was powerful, cold, and full of authority. "Human, your defiance is curious. You have slowed my forces, delayed my plan. Why do you resist?" Luke's jaw set firm. He had waited for this moment. He had faced fear and danger before, but now he would face the Queen directly. "Because humans do not surrender," he said, his voice steady despite the heat and noise. "We fight for our homes, our families, and our future. You may have power, but we have courage. That is something you cannot take." The Queen's ship paused, her energy beams halting in midair. Luke realized that she had never encountered a human like him. Most civilizations cowered at her arrival, but he had stood, alone, and faced her forces. That defiance, that courage, was not something she understood easily. Luke's eyes scanned the area. The colony below was safer now, at least for the moment. Families were moving to shelters, guided by the protectors who had returned to help. Children watched him, wide-eyed, hoping. He had to protect them, and he had to find a way to turn this moment to his advantage. He thought back to the scraps of alien technology he had collected over the years. Pieces of old drones, sensors, and power cores he had reverse-engineered. Most humans did not understand them, but Luke had studied them, learned their secrets, and learned how to use them. If he could combine them in the right way, he could do something the Queen did not expect. Luke moved carefully down the ridge, gathering pieces of discarded equipment scattered from previous attacks. He combined energy cores with small disruptor devices, forming a network that could manipulate energy fields. It was risky. He had no time for mistakes. One wrong connection and it could explode, destroying him and the colony. He worked quickly, hands steady despite the pressure. The Queen's ship hovered closer, her shadow covering everything. Energy beams lashed out, striking near him, but Luke did not flinch. He had survived worse. He focused on the task, connecting the devices, calibrating the pulses, and adjusting the output. Finally, the network was ready. He activated it. A wave of energy spread through the area, altering the energy fields around the canyon and the ridge. The Queen's sensors faltered, her energy beams misfired, and the scouts below stumbled. Luke had created a small but effective disruption. It was not destruction, but it was enough to confuse her, even momentarily. The Queen's voice boomed again. "Impressive, human. You are clever, but cleverness alone cannot save you." Luke did not answer. Instead, he adjusted the network, increasing its output. The energy pulse spread wider, reaching the Queen's ship itself. For a moment, the massive vessel shuddered. Energy readings fluctuated, engines faltered, and her beams wavered. Luke's heart raced. He had never tested this fully before. He was taking a huge risk, but he had no choice. From the colony below, humans watched in awe. The air shimmered with strange energy and the Queen's ships faltered. Some scouts fell to the ground, others froze in confusion. Luke's courage, intelligence, and preparation had turned the tide, if only slightly. The Queen's voice grew sharper, colder. "You are unlike any being I have encountered. Humans are unpredictable. Why do you persist?" Luke stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment. Because humans survive. We adapt, we learn, and we fight. You may have power, but we have will. That is something you cannot destroy. The Queen's ship hovered closer, her massive shadow covering Luke. Energy beams lashed out, striking near him, but the network he had created absorbed and redirected some of the energy. Rocks and debris shielded him from the rest. He moved carefully, adjusting the connections, keeping the system stable. Luke realized that the Queen's curiosity was growing. She was not attacking him directly yet. She wanted to see what this human would do. And Luke intended to show her something she had never experienced before. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small drone, a device he had built in secret. It was simple, but it could project a miniature energy field. He activated it and it floated into the air, moving toward the Queen's ship. The drone emitted pulses that interfered with her sensors. The massive vessel shuddered again, engines flickering. The Queen's voice echoed, filled with surprise. Interesting. You use technology in ways I did not anticipate. Humans are more dangerous than I thought. Luke smiled faintly. He had only begun. The drone was a small distraction, a test. He had more devices, more energy cores hidden in the canyon and ridge. He activated them one by one, sending pulses that twisted energy flows, confused sensors, and disrupted targeting systems. The Queen's ship trembled, more than it should have for a vessel of its size. He saw the scouts below faltering, confused by the energy pulses. The protectors joined in, attacking when they could. Luke realized that his actions were not just buying time, they were creating an opportunity. The Queen had underestimated humans. She had assumed fear and submission, but Luke had shown her that humans could be clever, courageous, and unpredictable. From the ridge, Luke could see the Queen preparing to strike directly. Her massive energy beams focused on his position. He knew he could not hold forever. But he had one final trick. He activated the network fully, overloading the energy fields around him and the canyon. Pulses shot outward, shimmering like waves in the air. The beams from the Queen's ship misfired, striking the canyon walls instead of him. Rocks and debris fell, blocking paths and slowing the scouts even more. The humans in the colony cheered quietly. They had seen a human stand against impossible odds and survive. Luke had not only slowed the Queen's forces, he had shown that humans could fight back intelligently. Courage alone had not won the battle, but courage combined with intelligence, preparation, and willpower had made a difference. Luke looked up at the Queen's massive ship. Her engines flickered and her energy beams wavered. He could feel her attention on him. She was curious now, studying him like an experiment. Luke knew this was dangerous, but he also knew that curiosity could be a weakness. The Queen was powerful, but she had never faced a human who combined courage and intelligence in this way. He activated the drone again, sending it closer to the ship. The pulses from it disrupted the energy fields further, causing minor fluctuations in her targeting systems. The Queen's voice boomed through the air. "Human, you are unique. Most species would have fallen. You are persistent." "Why?" Luke smiled faintly, sweat running down his face. "Because humans fight for what we love. We fight for our homes, our families, and each other. That is something you cannot destroy." The Queen paused, the massive ship hovering above. Luke realized that he had done something remarkable. He had not defeated her, but he had shown her that humans were not simple, predictable creatures. He had revealed a part of human strength that she could not understand fully: intelligence, courage, and willpower combined. The energy network he had built continued to pulse, keeping her forces confused and off balance. Luke adjusted it carefully, ensuring it remained stable. He knew he could not hold forever, but he had shown the Queen that even one human could stand against her. That revelation was powerful. For the first time, the Queen hesitated. She had faced civilizations, fleets, and armies, but she had never encountered a single human who could challenge her in this way. Luke Harmon had shown her something she did not expect. The scouts below were still struggling, some recovering, some still confused. The protectors fought when they could, and the humans in the colony moved cautiously towards safer areas. Luke realized that his actions had created hope. Even if the battle was far from over, hope was powerful. Luke took a deep breath. He had survived, slowed the Queen's forces, and shown that one human could make a difference. But he knew the Queen would not forget. She would return, stronger and more determined. Yet he had revealed something important. Humans were not weak. They could fight, adapt, and survive in ways no other species could predict. And as he stood there, the massive ship hovering above, Luke Harmon realized that his courage, intelligence, and determination had changed the rules of engagement. The Queen would now face humans with a new understanding. Even one could be a threat. The sky over Varney's 7 burned with light from the Queen's massive ship. Energy beams streaked across the horizon, and the air shook with the hum of engines and explosions. Luke Harmon stood on the ridge, his hands steady on the energy disruptor and the network of devices he had built. The Queen had not forgotten him. She had studied him, tested him, and now she was ready to strike directly. Luke's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He had survived the scouts, slowed her forces, and shown humans could resist even the strongest powers in the galaxy. Now it was time to face the Queen herself. He could feel her attention like a weight pressing down on him, but he did not flinch. Humans were not built to fear, they were built to fight, adapt, and survive. And Luke Harmon would prove it. The Queen's ship descended, engines roaring. Her energy beams shot out, striking the canyon walls near Luke. He rolled behind a boulder, the heat washing over him. He activated the disruptor network fully, sending pulses of energy that twisted and confused the Queen's targeting systems. Rocks fell from the cliffside, blocking the remaining scouts, who hesitated under the new threat. Luke knew this was his chance. He ran toward a narrow plateau that gave him a better view of the Queen's ship. From here, he could see her weak points, the flow of energy from her engines, and the angles of her weapons. He set up his devices carefully, connecting energy cores to the disruptor. Every movement had to be precise. One mistake and he could die instantly. The Queen's voice boomed across the valley. "Human, your persistence is remarkable, but it ends now. Surrender and your species may yet survive. Resist and all will perish." Luke smiled faintly. "I will never surrender. Humans fight no matter the odds, and even one human can make a difference." With that, he activated the network fully. Energy waves spread across the ridge and canyon, distorting the Queen's sensors and weapon systems. The massive ship trembled, its engines flickering. For a moment, the impossible seemed possible. Luke had not destroyed her, but he had forced her to pause. He took a deep breath and reached into his pack, pulling out a small drone he had built in secret. It floated into the air, moving toward the Queen's ship. It emitted pulses that interfered with her systems, causing minor malfunctions in the targeting computers. The Queen's beams wavered, missing their marks by meters. Luke's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He had one final plan. He activated additional power cores hidden in the canyon and along the ridge. The explosions were controlled, precise, and timed with the pulses from the drone and disruptor network. Rocks and debris fell, blocking the scouts and creating confusion. The Queen's attention was divided, and her massive ship shuddered under the combined energy disruptions. Luke moved carefully, keeping his devices stable. He could feel the Queen observing him, analyzing him. Her curiosity was clear. She had never seen a species act this way, alone, clever, and brave. Most civilizations submitted at her arrival, but he had resisted, and now he was teaching her that humans could not be ignored. The scouts below struggled in the chaos. Some tried to advance, but the terrain, combined with the energy pulses, blocked their paths. The protectors fought when they could, but most were too cautious after their initial retreat. Luke had created a safe path for the humans in the colony. Families moved quickly, carrying children and supplies to safer areas. Hope had returned. The Queen's ship descended lower, and Luke realized she was preparing a direct strike. Energy beams focused on his location, and the ground shook under their power. He activated the disruptor fully, sending a strong pulse outward. The beams wavered, striking rocks and cliffs instead of him. Luke ran, jumping over gaps and using the terrain to avoid destruction. He reached a higher ridge, giving him a better angle on the Queen's ship. The massive vessel loomed above, glowing with power. Luke knew this was the moment that would decide everything. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. Courage alone would not be enough. He needed strategy, intelligence, and the will to act. Luke activated the network fully, combining all his devices and energy cores. Pulses spread like waves through the canyon and ridge, creating a field that distorted energy, light, and movement. The Queen's sensors faltered, her beams misfired, and her ship trembled. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Luke reached into his pack again, pulling out the last drone. It floated toward the Queen's ship, emitting pulses that interfered with her engines. Sparks and energy arcs flew across her hull. The massive ship shuddered violently, its systems struggling to maintain control. Luke smiled faintly. Humans had always adapted, and now he had shown her one way they could fight back. The Queen's voice boomed, filled with surprise and curiosity. "Human, your persistence, your intelligence, why do you continue?" Luke's eyes met the shadow of the massive ship above. "Because humans fight. We fight for each other, for our homes, for our future. You cannot take that away. You cannot destroy what drives us." The Queen paused, her ship hovering above him. Luke realized she was learning something about humans she had never understood. They were not just creatures of fear or survival. They were clever, courageous, and determined. One human could challenge even the greatest power in the galaxy. Luke activated the network one final time. Pulses of energy spread outward, striking the Queen's ship and her remaining scouts. Rocks fell, debris flew, and the canyon shook. The ship shuddered violently, and energy arcs danced across its hull. The Queen's attention was fully on him now, studying, analyzing, and recalculating. Luke ran down the ridge, moving with precision, guiding the energy pulses to the right angles, using the terrain to amplify the effects. The scouts below were disoriented, some falling, others retreating. The protectors joined in, striking the confused forces. Luke had created chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Every movement was deliberate. The humans in the colony watched, inspired. They had never seen one human challenge such power and survive. Hope had returned, and with it, courage. Children clutched each other, parents stood taller, and the protectors fought with renewed determination. Luke could feel the Queen's attention focusing entirely on him. Her ship loomed closer, massive and threatening. Energy beams lashed out, but the disruptor network absorbed and redirected some of the power. Rocks and debris shielded him from the rest. He moved carefully, adjusting the network and the drones, keeping the system stable. Finally, he reached a position where he could act decisively. The Queen's ship hovered directly above the canyon, her energy focused on him. Luke activated all the drones, sending pulses in perfect timing with the disruptor network. The ship shuddered violently, energy arcs spreading across its hull. The beams misfired completely, striking the rocky walls around the canyon. The scouts below were thrown into confusion. Some stumbled, others collided with each other. The protectors fought more confidently, striking where they could. The humans in the colony moved to safety, inspired by Luke's courage and intelligence. The Queen's voice boomed, filled with surprise and curiosity. "Human, you are unlike any species I have encountered. Most would have fallen, but you persist. Why?" Luke smiled faintly, exhausted but determined. "Because humans fight, we never give up, and even one human can make a difference." For a moment, the Queen's ship paused, hovering above the ridge. The energy pulses from the network and drones continued to disrupt her systems. She studied him, realizing that humans were more than she had thought. Courage, intelligence, and willpower combined could challenge even the greatest power in the galaxy. Luke Harmon had done the impossible. He had slowed the Queen's forces, protected the colony, and shown that one human could stand against overwhelming odds. Hope had returned to the humans of Varney's 7, and the protectors had seen that courage and intelligence could turn the tide. The Queen finally withdrew slightly, her massive ship hovering above but no longer striking directly. She studied him, curiosity and respect in her voice. "You are unique human. You have survived when others would have fallen. You have changed my understanding. I will watch carefully." Luke stood tall, breathing hard. He had survived, protected the humans, and challenged the Queen herself. The battle was not over for the galaxy, but he had shown that humans were not to be underestimated. Even one human could make a difference. He looked down at the colony, seeing the families and protectors working together, moving to safer areas. The humans had hope again. Courage, intelligence, and determination had won this moment. Luke Harmon had stood against impossible odds and changed the course of events with his bravery. The Queen's ship finally moved away, not fully retreating but leaving the humans alive. Luke knew she would return, stronger and more determined. But for now, he had won. He had proven that humans could stand, fight, and survive against powers that seemed unbeatable. And as he stood on the ridge, looking at the colony and the horizon, Luke Harmon realized that one human could change the course of history. One human could challenge even a queen of the galaxy. One human could inspire hope, courage, and determination in others. The humans of Varney's 7 had survived. Luke Harmon had stood his ground. And the galaxy would never forget that even the smallest flame of courage could burn brighter than the mightiest shadow.